Greg Smith, Dennis Zine, and Bernard Parks. It is Monday, April 13. The weekly DNA item will be continued because the relevant folks from the LAPD are not available today. In terms of our consent possibilities, colleagues, they are items 5 through 9. Item 5 needs an instruction added to adopt the recommendations in the CLA's report, but anything 5 through 9 you want to call special, just call it special. Okay, so 5, call it special. Anything else, Mr. Zine?
One second. Give me a second here.
There's a question I had on one of the sheets. About the engineers.
I think I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
I had a question on it too.
Is it quick? I mean, should we just get it done?
Yeah, we can, if we can.
Okay, why don't we bring item 8 before us, so Mr. Smith can ask this quick question, and then, because the other items will take substantially longer.
John White, City Clerk, item 8. SEER report relative to amending agreements with various contractors to provide continued design service for the construction of new and replacement public safety facilities and the renovation of existing facilities under the Proposition Q Public Safety Bond Program.
Melissa Krantz, Office of the CAO. This is an amendment to the supplemental agreement with on-call construction contractors. This amendment is necessary for the 3 proposed project additions to the Proposition Q program, and the project additions are detailed under item 7.
Great. Good morning, Mr. Smith.
Yeah, the question, and I'm getting caught up real quick here. The question dealt with the process of hiring additional city staff versus.
Yes, as part of the 1022 process, the Bureau of Engineering submits a request to Personnel Department as part of their intention to contract out. Personnel Department said that there is city staff classifications that can do the work. However, there was not classification available. There's a list that's one list that's available. However, there's a hiring process that we'd have to go through. That would
Right.
take about 6 months.
Right.
We're ready to begin these renovation projects now.
So we're not going to be using city engineers
We
then?
do have some city staffing available. There will be city engineers working on it. These are supplemental assistants, and that Bureau of Engineering can certainly address the scope of work that they'll be doing.
And in the mayor's unofficial proposal on the budget, there was some elimination of city engineers. Could we rather reassign some of those people and keep them rather than laying off and trying to hire back, or bring back now and then lay off in 2 months? Have we looked at that train of thought, that there's going to be major adjustments in the department that may be able to fit those people in July 1 rather than eliminating jobs, hiring back, and doing it kind of a cumbersome way?
Well, what we have with the on-call contractors is their expertise in designing police stations. Of course, what we expect them to do is also a structural retrofit for Rampart Area Station, which is for seismic safety. And the Bureau of Engineering can certainly address why the contracting out is necessary.
Good morning, Vince Jones with the Bureau of Engineering. I'm the program manager for the Prop Q police bond program. The work that we intend the consultants to do is, again, specialized work. For instance, the scope of work includes work at the police academy, and part of that scope involves renovating the shooting ranges. And we require an expert design consultant to direct us on how to do
Yeah,
that.
I get the consultant stuff, that's not a problem. The question is about your backup people within the Bureau of Engineering, and whether you're going to have them on July 1st or not, or if you got backup to do that
We do
portion
have
of the work.
city staffing for the Bureau of Engineering, and what we have is city staffing that is has not been downsized,
Yeah.
with respect to the consultant.
Okay. Well, I just want to keep that train of thought as we go into the budget session in a few more weeks, because there are projected layoffs within the Bureau of Engineering, significant layoffs. So I don't want to be laying off somebody that we're now relying upon for this project, and we got to go back and save that position or rehire or whatever the mess. So I just want to make sure to keep that
Yes.
train of thought as we go into the budget in 3 weeks. Okay.
Okay, well, we appreciate the answers to those questions. Is this a note and file, Mr. White, or?
This is an approval of the CO report.
Okay, done. Thank you very much. All right, let's go back to the, I guess, items 2 and 3. Can you call those together, please, Mr. White?
Items 2 and 3. Item 2, motion Labange Han instructing the Emergency Preparedness Department, Information Technology Agency, and the Police and Fire Departments to report relative to implementing a reverse 911 call system with an emphasis on targeting hillside areas in the city. And item 3, motion Parks Cardenas instructing the CLA, the CAO, with the assistance of the ITA, Fire, Police, and Emergency Preparedness Departments, proprietary departments, and any other department who may use mass notification system technology to report with an evaluation of mass notification systems and related matters.
Good morning, Captain Joe of ITA. As you know, a RFP for a mass notification system was released on February the 12th, so I'd like to give an update on where we are with the whole process. Let's see, the deadlines for the proposals were March the 23rd. We received 11 proposals. At this stage right now, we're still in the process of doing the good faith effort reviews that should be completed this week. At that point, those that pass will be evaluated by a committee consisting of ITA, the Police Department, Fire Department, Emergency Management Department, Department of Disability, and DWP. I anticipate the whole process taking about 4 to 6 weeks, at which point I'd like to come back and report on potential costs, potential funding sources, and a recommendation for award of contract. That concludes my report as far as the RFP. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I believe staff from other departments are available also.
Thank you.
Good morning. Dennis Blumhoff with the Fire Department. The Fire Department currently uses the Communicator NXT software and services from Dialogic Communications Corporation. In 2008 and so far this year, the Fire Department has activated the red flag notification system 15 times, sending notifications to a total of 7,900 devices registered to approximately 3,900 people. The Fire Department is currently assisting other departments, including the Department of Building and Safety, the Emergency Management Department, Department on Disability, and also working with the Mayor's Office on their internal notifications. We're also working with organizations such as the Mayor's Crisis Response Team, the Community Emergency Response Team, and the Los Angeles Regional Tactical Communications System. We're also working with the internal FEMA teams. The numbers we have so far on notifications with our system, the CERT team in 2009, we've notified 672 people. For LARTCS in 2008, we notified 7,800 people. This year to date, 2,100 people. And FEMA in 2008, 6,000. And in this year to date, 2,000. Our software expenses so far, concluding May 31st of this year, is $26,650. That includes software support and maintenance and hosting services. That concludes my report. Are there any questions?
Mr. Parks may have some questions, but Mr. Parks, there's a card from Angela Kaufman of the Department of, why don't you come forward and make your comment, and then proceed to discussion. Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Angela Kaufman. I'm with the city's Department on Disability. I do want to thank ITA and the Fire Department. We've been working very closely with them to help ensure that people with disabilities in the deaf community are notified. Some of the concerns that we still do have is when the issue of reverse 911 is called into question versus the mass notification. They're using two separate systems. One is through an internet, email, phone, mobile phone. The 911 system is based on a landline notification, and that's where our department has more critical concerns for the deaf community and for those who have speech disabilities. So depending on how things are implemented within the city, there might need to be a different approach used if it's going to be a landline notification. This public education for these systems is critical for the deaf community to understand exactly what it means when they receive these notifications, what certain language might be used, and what they need to do to react on that. So our department is requesting that within the funding that's set aside for the systems, that specific funding also be set aside in the public education forum specifically for the deaf community and for people with disabilities.
That makes sense. Thank you for being here, and I understand that you guys have been involved in this process. That's very good. Mr. Park.
Let me just ask you, are you concerned primarily with the education and training part, or are you concerned about the technology in reaching the hearing impaired community?
Depending on which system is utilized and whether it's a combination of both systems, the landline notification system for the deaf community has been a very large challenge within the industry. There might only be a couple of vendors that actually do it the way that we would like it to be done, where it seems more seamless. Many of the vendors actually require what's called a registration process on the landline that somebody like myself or yourself would not need to register for. And that's where the tricky situation comes into play, is the deaf community is not really informed well enough about the need to register. And it's the use of the different devices within the community. So there is a technology component related to landline notification versus the mass notification through email or pagers or other devices.
When you mentioned earlier, or I think they commented that the system that they've been looking at will go across the spectrum of cell phones, landline phone. Does that cover your issue as it relates to the landline, or is there something in addition that you believe they should be doing?
We believe that what ITA has put out in the RFP that we were involved with will satisfy the department's need because everybody will register.
Okay.
And so if it's based on that, we don't have a separate category.
Thank you.
Questions on the report, anybody?
Yes. Let me just write myself. Let me just for clarity, one of the things that was mentioned in the report is the issue of the current departments are using an internet base in the sense of emails to make notification. And the concern I have is that last we checked, I don't think we have 50% of the cities on internet. And so that's why we are looking at a variety of ways to contact, because we would lose significant number of people, particularly in communities of poverty that do not have it. So we just want to make sure that as we move forward that we're not restrained by the fact that there's individual standalone systems that deal with emails that may exclude large portions of the city. The other one is the, let's see, the other thing, just for clarity, when we talk about phones, are we covering the gamut for houses, businesses, cell phones are all part of the system that we're looking for?
Yes.
Okay, so there's, I mean, there's no loop there that we're not covering. Okay.
including faxes.
Okay. And then also on the RFP, are we looking on the RFP as a pilot initially and then go full speed? Are we looking to implement the entire program initially?
The RFP calls for full implementation, actually on an accelerated timeline.
And then we have a CAO. Just like to ask a question. We have somebody finish. Don't look around, June. It's you. CLA, come here. Let me just ask, is this something that stimulus funds would support? Any of the funding that's coming down?
Based on what we've reviewed, the stimulus package does not appear that mass notification is included as one of the items.
Your name, June?
That's June.
It's June.
June Gibson, CLA. But we're continuing to review potential grant funding.
Okay, and if without grants, what other sources can we look at?
None.
Is this something, what we call the UASI grants or anything like that, that would fit this?
Based on historical grant issuance from UASI, it appears that the only circumstance under which UASI would provide funding is for a very narrow, limited purpose. UOSI grants have already been provided to the fire department for the system they currently have. They've also provided funding to the police department for the narrow system that they have. It does not appear that UOSI would be receptive to providing the city additional funding for this purpose.
Even if this system would replace them, the ones that are in place?
We could certainly evaluate that, but I'm not very optimistic that that would be an option.
Okay, but we're still looking.
We are still looking, sir.
Okay, thanks. That's all.
No, nothing.
I had the same question, Mr. Barksdale, because I don't think the Budget Committee is going to fund anything new this year unless there's a big chunk of money with it somewhere, so.
And I would just say at the same time that I think that, I understand that, and I think all of us understand that. But I would just encourage the departments, as the responses come in, don't try to sell us something that is cheap and ultimately perhaps not that effective in terms of a major disaster. I mean, the point of this is to do two things. One is in a major disaster to do something that the city's never been able to do before. And the other is, with all due respect to what the fire department has now, is to really layer on a whole new set of capabilities to sort of the daily operations of government. And I would just encourage you to try to find the right system, and then, you know, chips will fall where they may, budget-wise. All right. Well, with that, we appreciate the update, and we'll hear from you again in the coming weeks or months. Thank you. Next item, please, Mr. White.
Item 4, motion Park Design Smith relative to the Police Department's revised Code 3 response policy.
Good morning, Chief McDonald.
Mr. Weiss.
You've got the floor.
Thank you very much. Just a little background on the issue. I think there's been some confusion as to what this policy does and doesn't affect. Let me go through, if I could, what the law allows. The California Vehicle Code, Section 21055, provides that a driver of an authorized emergency vehicle is exempt from the rules of the road as long as the vehicle is being driven in response to an emergency call and the driver of the vehicle sounds a siren as may be reasonably necessary and the vehicle displays a lighted red lamp visible from the front as a warning to other drivers and pedestrians. That Vehicle Code section, or 21056, states that first section, 25055, does not relieve the driver of a vehicle from the duty to drive with due regard for the safety of all persons using the highway, nor protect them from the consequences of an arbitrary exercise of the privileges granted in that section. California Vehicle Code Section 17004 protects officers and the city from civil liability when they're acting in the line of duty when responding to an emergency call and complying with Vehicle Code Section 21055. The current policy and procedure, what we're talking about today doesn't affect pursuit policy at all. That would remain unchanged. The current system assigns to an officer needs help or a firefighter needs help call, assigns one unit Code 3, and all others are expected to go Code 2. This forces officers who are engaging in responding to that call to either sit in traffic oftentimes while one unit goes Code 3, or to violate the rules and go Code 3 in order to be able to get there and render aid or assistance. The whole idea of Code 2.5, which is the police jargon, as you all know, for getting there and putting the lights on when you need to get them and doing it in a way that's not authorized by the Vehicle Code, exposes the city to liability. It puts the officers in a position where if they're going to get there, particularly with high traffic areas of the city or high times of the day where traffic is problematic, their choices are limited. They either put the lights and siren on to get around that traffic to get to the emergency, or they sit in the traffic. It's our belief that the expectation of the public demands that the officers get there as expeditiously as possible, as safely as possible, and that's what we believe that given the officers the latitude to be able to respond Code 3 at their own discretion for an emergency call for service, does both. It provides the officer the ability to get there quickly. It provides the public with the expectation that the officer will do exactly that, and it protects the city and the officers from liability relative to operating outside the California Vehicle section that allows them to not follow the rules of the road, if you will, relative to traffic lights and traffic patterns. Also, we talk about officer and firefighter needs assistance. Currently, that's Respond Code 2. The backup request not considered an emergency, only the specific unit assigned is supposed to respond. Code 3, any call may justify a Code 3 if any of the following elements are met: a serious public hazard, the preservation of life, a crime of violence in progress. We changed that later to serious by a special order rather than a crime of violence. The prevention of a crime of violence also changed to prevention of a serious crime. An immediate pursuit, a unit at the scene requests another unit, Code 3. Currently, only one unit is assigned Code 3 calls, and every other unit that's going to respond is expected to respond Code 2. When we looked at this, we're trying to craft a policy within the law to be able to provide immunity from civil liability that provides the best service to the community and the protection of our officers. The changes, as we're proposing, allow officers the discretion to respond Code 3 to any emergency, to allow multiple units to respond Code 3 to an emergency. We eliminate the officer needs assistance request. We redefine help and backup requests to comply with the California Vehicle Code, and we add a non-emergency additional unit request. We change the definition of emergency from a crime of violence in progress to a serious crime in progress. That allows officers to respond Code 3 to burglaries in progress, burglary from motor vehicles potentially in progress, and other calls that the community deems, as we do, serious, but would not be necessarily a crime of violence in progress. As previously mentioned, the notification requirement changed for officers self-initiating a Code 3 response. So in summation, what we're trying to do is take it from where it currently is, where officers are responding unauthorized Code 3, to be able to get there quickly, provide them with the protection to be able to do so, but to hold them accountable, both the officers' supervision and management, for ensuring that they do so in a safe and reasonable fashion.
Thank you, Chief. I don't know if Chief or Commander have any part of the presentation that you guys are making.
I'm here to answer any training questions that might come up.
Commander Stuart Maislin, I'll respond to questions. I think Chief McDonald covered it.
Commander Maislin runs our risk management function. Chief MacArthur, our training function.
Okay. Why don't you just give us just a 1-second summary, Commander, of the liability concerns that the existing policy have raised over the last few years?
Correct. Since 2006, we haven't paid out yet, but we've incurred over $11 million in liability as a result of traffic collisions where officers were responding to true emergencies, yet they were not using their emergency lights and siren. They were driving, as Chief McDonald mentioned, Code 2.5. They were violating the rules of the road without the protection of the vehicle code by using their emergency equipment. So there was one such collision in 2005, one in 2000, and two in 2006, one going all the way back to 2003. 2003 collision, we paid out $6.25 million. One of the 2006 collisions, we paid out $1 million, and the second 2006, we paid out or will pay out $4.5 million. Actually, this year. It was approved by the council last year, but has not been paid until 2009. So actually, that's the 4.5 and the 1 million.
Okay. Thank you. All right, we'll go left to right, Mr. Zine.
Thank you. The issue on the 11 million liability, and I understand the issue of liability and immunity. I don't question that at all. How many cases did we have liability where the units were Code 3?
You know, wait, pardon me, Mr. Zine, I apologize. Mr. Repovich, you put in a public comment card. Why don't we hear your comment before we get to the council discussion? So just hold that for that question and that response. You do your public comment, and then we'll go to the discussion round. Mr. Repovich.
Peter Repovich, Director, Los Angeles Police Protective League. We're very supportive of the new policy. We think the department has thought out of the box on this issue. Quite often, officers have to have the ability to go Code 3. In the past, they didn't have it legally. I think it's important that they do have it legally. And it's a new way, it's a more honest approach to responding to emergency calls. And so I think only good can come of it. Officer safety is paramount to us. Liability is one thing, safety is another. But we think it actually enhances officer safety.
The new policy.
The new policy.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Zine, back to you.
Thank you. The question was on the cases where the units were Code 3, authorized Code 3, liability in any of those cases?
I'd like to give you a fair answer to that question. Bottom line is, I'm not aware of any such cases. My stop in risk management, we traditionally did not handle traffic collisions. However, the city attorney gets us involved in, when they ask us for assistance, we provide it, and we certainly got involved in some of the larger ones. Now we're getting involved in all of them. I'm not familiar over the last 5 years I've been in risk management with any serious traffic collisions or any serious liability resulting from authorized Code 3 response. We did have one lawsuit that involved a unit responding Code 3. However, they were responding quote-unquote unauthorized Code 3 from the standpoint that they responded that they were backing the unit that was assigned Code 3 but did not use the term Code 3 when they said they were responding with the other unit. That became a big issue during trial by the plaintiff, really muddying the waters in the whole situation by trying to point out that the officers were disciplined for going unauthorized Code 3 per department policy, yet they were going Code 3 as authorized by law.
Okay.
So that's the only one that I'm aware of. We did take a hit, although it is being, a decision to appeal or not has not been made yet. But that was a $175,000 verdict, I believe it was, and about $130,000 of that would result in liability to the city.
Okay. I know from my time I spoke to you, also Chief McDonald, about when Code 3 was a rare situation for units, which now it's become a frequent, everyday occurrence for many units. So I think the adrenaline and maybe the excitement of Code 3 to get to the location has changed. The philosophy, I think, has changed dramatically from years ago. The issue about liability is of great concern. Also, has been mentioned by Pete Breffish from the League, is that the concern of liability, the issue of officer safety. And the concern I had is multiple units going Code 3, converging on an intersection from sometimes 4 directions, Metro in their cars. Some cars are marked, some aren't. Motor officers, I want to give them discretion, but I don't want to see any officers get hurt. So the concern is enhanced training, I assume, would be part of this, right, to say we would enhance the training to let them know to be more cautious as they're approaching intersections. Not so concerned about the straightaways, but mainly my concern is the intersections. The other issue is motorists not yielding. Motorists not yielding to authorized emergency vehicles, whether it be the police or fire, ambulance. When we drive down the street, we pull over, we stop, people making left turns, people going through. What training has taken place since the department changed their policy on dispatching Code 3 with the additional use Code 3 and the motorist's lack of compliance with the pull to the right and stop? Chief?
Yeah, the training that this policy is going to create is multiple levels. The first level is we're going to do the basic roll call training, but simultaneously we're going to be sending out the e-learning training, which every officer from P1 all the way up to the chief of police has to take. And that training is also designed then to do later on follow-up training segments. So it'll be able to be broken into smaller components to do the refresher training more frequently. The one thing we find with, as you know, with roll call training is we have a tendency we can miss people. And so therefore the e-learning allows us to know and track exactly who's taken the training, and then also allows us to know when the training was completed so that we can do the follow-up training for it. We of course have the training prepared to enhance at the recruit level and talk about multiple responses. We talk about it already, as you well know, because we know that sometimes people will go put their lights and sirens out without reporting it. So we do talk about always being cautious. We also have ambulances and such being able to go through the city with their lights and sirens on. So we do already talk about multiple units going Code 3 to multiple incidents, especially in the last few years as we've seen a rise in calls that require us to go Code 3. So to answer the question about training we believe is going to be much more targeted to every individual so that it's not just something that you might hear. You actually are going to have to participate in the Code 3 training. And then as we design our mandated post-training that we do every 2 years for perishable skills with driving, it'll be infused into that as well.
Will there be actual driving at the range, or will it be academic?
No, we do, actually, on the perishable skills, we do make them all do the training.
Okay.
Yeah,
The hands-on training.
the hands-on training.
If I could, Mr. Zine, just in addition to the training piece, your concern about the convergence at a location of multiple units, Code 3, we share that concern, but that's no different than it is currently, except they'd all be authorized now. They aren't currently all authorized. The issues would be the same there, and on the failure to yield by community members, that's something that we can continue to look at as an education process for the community. But with units going Code 3 rather than Code 2.5, then the community members have an expectation, or at least they have the ability to hear and see a unit responding to an emergency, rather than a black and white coming up and trying to go as fast as they can get there without the benefit of lights and siren. I think it's a greater safety measure for the community members to be able to have them go in Code 3 rather than racing without the benefit of lights and siren.
Well, clearly, with the traffic that we have in Los Angeles, I understand the significance and the importance and the necessity of that. The other question is, and it may get down to the hair splitting when it comes to court, that's what they normally do. They split those hairs as thin as they can. A serious public hazard, have they defined serious? Or is serious up to the discretion of an officer?
It's up to the discretion of the officer. It depends on what the circumstances are at the time. If an officer, it could be, in the mind of the officer, if they know there's only, a handful of cars working the division that night and there's a perimeter going in another part of the division, they know the level of seriousness or the need to get there is heightened because there are fewer people out there. So I think we've intentionally tried to be not very specific on these things, so to leave latitude to the officer, to leave latitude to the watch commander to be able to monitor what's going on, and the supervisors in the field to be able to take appropriate action and provide guidance.
So if an officer believes it's serious, from their interpretation, the department's not going to come back and say, well, when we look at that, that really wasn't serious.
Well, as long as everything is judged against the reasonableness standard. So if an officer is reasonable in doing what they're doing, and supervisor looks at it and doesn't believe it was necessary, then the supervisor would address that issue with the officer. The watch commander would monitor that overall, and the captain of the division is going to be looking at all of these because they'll be looked at during the ComStat process as well as to how we're managing this.
And it would be a training issue if there was a misinterpretation of serious.
It would be a training issue initially, and if it was somebody who was abusing the ability to go Code 3, it would be a discipline issue.
And regarding pursuits, after a pursuit, there's a report that's required. Would the officers be required to do reports if they initiate a Code 3 to an incident?
No, it wouldn't be that wouldn't be a pursuit. To initiate Code 3 to a response to an incident would be there would be no report associated with that other than a log entry. If it was an actual pursuit, the primary unit in the pursuit would be responsible for the report.
Right. I just didn't want to see more paperwork generated because you went red light and siren.
Yeah. No. Thank you for that. No.
And the other question, you mentioned this series that pursuits are not included. It's still the existing policy, but it says under the second issue, officer's responsibility may initiate Code 3, response to emergency. Emergency exists when, blah, blah, and immediate pursuit.
Right.
So while you're saying the pursuit policy remains the same,
right.
Primary unit Code 3, this doesn't, and liberal interpretation of this, it's saying immediate pursuit. Someone could interpret this to say, well, anybody can go Code 3 to the pursuit then. Unless it says immediate pursuit, but...
We made clear in the special order, there's a section there on pursuit where we've made it clear that the current pursuit policy does not change. This was the previous language in immediate pursuit. So that's
been changed?
That's not a change with the new special order. And the new special order clearly specifies in there that current pursuit policy doesn't change and they have to comply with the current pursuit policy.
But it says that you can go Code 3 in immediate pursuit. There may be a conflict, or I'm reading something that's... The first one is a serious public hazard.
Right.
And the second one is an immediate pursuit.
Right.
Under Special Order Number 13. So if you're saying immediate pursuit...
You go Code 3 in immediate pursuit, but the parameters of what you're required to do don't change from our pursuit policy. Our Code 3 policy is here. Our pursuit policy is here. Pursuit policy is very specific as to what's allowed, what's not allowed. Code 3 response is only that. Responding to somewhere with the lights and siren on.
And what we've made clear in the special order that, because we allow a primary and a secondary unit in pursuit, and I understand your concern is that now it opens the door for everybody to go code 3 in a pursuit, and it does not, because in the special order we said responding backup units may respond code 3. However, once all authorized units have joined the pursuit, all other units shall discontinue their code 3 response. So we've made it clear, when there's a primary and a secondary, that's it.
What section is that in there?
That's on page 4 in Roman numeral 2.
Okay. Okay, so that clarifies it. Okay. Because when you look at that in the second page, it looks like it's opening up to everybody.
Right.
But the first unit is in pursuit, the second unit can get their
First
code
and
3.
second, the primary and secondary units are code 3 in a pursuit. A supervisor may join them, code 3 as well, to monitor and control the pursuit. Any additional units responding to be able to provide a quick perimeter can do that only until they're in the area of the pursuit,
And
then discontinue. Yeah, the focus is still management of the pursuit by the supervisor who's involved, or the watch commander, whether they're actually at scene or otherwise.
And the, those are the initial questions I have.
Okay,
Thank you.
Mr. Smith?
Yeah, just briefly, and I told Commander Mason this last week, I think the department's definitely going in the right direction. They got rid of code too high. I always thought that was one of the most dangerous things the city allowed.
Right.
Because it's not codified anywhere, and you put officers at risk and the department at great risk. So that was a great move, and John Miller headed that up a few years ago. This is the next element to that. My concerns were not so much that we're loosening up a policy, because really every other department in the state of California operates more like this than what LAPD used to do.
In the United States, yeah.
In the United States. So I think we're going the right direction. The concern I had was particularly in training, and Commander Mason and I talked about the other day. I'd like to have you just repeat that for the record, but in supervisorial training, what my concern was is the conflagration of a bunch of people going all of a sudden code 3, and somebody saying, no, we've got enough, only one more, two more, whatever is necessary, based on the severity of the crime. And that's where the field sergeants come in and the watchers come in. So what will be the training component for them in this? You're going to have a separate section now? They're going to have to go back for retraining, a 4-hour section, 8-hour section? What are you going to do?
Well, we don't typically do worry about the hour. We worry about the content.
Right.
So with it may not be a full 2-3 hours, but part of the e-learning will have a specific component for supervisors. So if you're a supervisor level or above, sergeant or above, or a D2 also would be included in that or above, then you would take that component of the e-learning. We're also infusing it into both Watch Commander School and into the new supervisor school. And that component, I believe, is right now it is a 2-hour block, and it'll be infused into that so that they understand. One of the things we're doing in supervisor school, without sidebarring for too long, is we're really getting our supervisors to understand about critical thinking and applying the critical thinking thought process to all of the things that they're supposed to be monitoring and controlling in the field. So we're looking at foot pursuits, we're looking at vehicle pursuits, we're looking at code 3 runs, we're looking at use of force incidents, handling categorical situations, OISs in the field. So we have a complete day set aside specifically to that type of management.
Excellent.
And one of the things, if I can add to that we did talk about last week is, as I mentioned, we traditionally, in the way we do our lesson plans now, even for roll call training, we provide scenarios to the officers, and scenarios will be provided to the supervisors, and it'll provide examples of what's acceptable and what may not be acceptable, when they should intervene, when they shouldn't intervene, or how they should intervene. So guidance will be provided. We're not just throwing it out there and saying, you decide. They'll be given some examples of the good and the bad.
Okay. And let me give you a hypothetical, because it does happen, and that is when a division goes totally sideways. You've got a division that's maybe got 4 or 5 cars out there. They get a major incident, a shooting, whatever. Every car is wrapped up now. Units from other divisions are responding into that division to take up their call load. Right. Who's going to watch their calls from other divisions as they're called in, and they may need to go code 3 because they're going a longer distance to get to a crime? Who's going to be the supervisor in charge? Because the RTO, the watch commander, the field sergeants in the other division may be totally tied up.
Right.
Who's going to watch that?
They'd still be assigned to a supervisor to monitor their activities. That supervisor may elect to stay in the division they're assigned, or they may choose, if it's a heavy enough call, to follow the assigned unit to respond to the call outside their division.
So it's the division where they're assigned that's going
Right,
to
as well
determine...
as the umbrella of having the supervisors and watch commander in the division where the call is being assigned, also to oversee those officers' activities and behavior.
Very good.
So it's when I look at this in the big picture, I think that it's incumbent on all of us, every officer on the street and anybody in the department will tell you this is a common sense approach, as you well know, to handling police work. And it's something that none of us want to lose. We want to be able to move forward with this. We want to be able to provide a greater level of service to the community, but do so in a safe manner and do so in a way that makes sense. And we believe that this certainly is a common sense approach. When I look at the numbers, just for give you a little context, look at the numbers going back to 2000 for the number of Code 3 calls. So there were 91,261 assigned in 2000, and when you look at that, it's gotten smaller every year, to where in 2008 there was a total of 46,900. And I attribute that, and you look at the number of pursuits, 629 in 2000, kind of up and down in the interim years, and 344 last year. So quite a substantial decrease going help calls. The 3,813 in 2000, 603 last year. So I attribute that to the decrease in crime, particularly violent crime. So I think we're the beneficiary of that across the board. But in looking at how do we take it to the next level now, and I think this policy that we're proposing here today will help us do that.
Yeah, and I concur, and I just... I want to thank Mr. Rosendahl, who really pushed very hard in the Budget and Finance Committee, because he sat through a number of these lawsuits saying, my God, why aren't we letting those guys put the lights and sirens on? It was the right thing to do, and of course, John Miller, who really started the thought process a couple years ago. So thank you very much. I totally support it again. I said this to Stuart the other day. It's just we had those details. We wanted to make sure we're right. So
thank you, sir.
Okay. Let me just ask, on the current system, is an officer prohibited of going over the air asking to go Code 3?
They're not prohibited from going over the air. They have a tendency not to do it. With digital radios now, you don't want to step on, particularly a help call, step on other officers or the officer who put out the help call. So there is a hesitancy to do that.
The people that you're concerned with, the Code 2.5, that choose to violate the rules, and they're reluctant to go over the air and say, I'm going Code 3. And so now, with this system, it appears, if I read it correctly, that a lot of people can go Code 3 without going over the air.
Correct.
So therefore, there's no knowledge of those who may be on a directed call or anyone in the division that there are a bunch of people going Code 3, and there could be simultaneous events going on at any one time, and there's no clarity as to how far you can come from or what is the information you need to use that discretion. And I think in addition, what I'm concerned about is that it appears you're changing fundamentally, historically, what drove calls is that the best information was the people at the scene. Either the PR was talking to communications and they're telling them what's going on, communications had some guidelines that they then dispatched units, or an officer was at the scene and they could ask for whatever they thought they needed, 1 unit, 2 units. Now we're saying an officer could be 2 or 3 miles away and they could make a judgment based on not much information, but just a judgment that I'm going to drive Code 3. And I think, and if I'm not mistaken, the issue of the liability attributes to the operator of the vehicle. It's, the way I understand it, does not attribute to the city. So the fact that the operator might not have punitive damages doesn't mean the city's not liable.
Mm-hmm.
And so these are things that liability might move the officer out of harm's way punitively, but the city's liability, if you have all of these folks going Code 3 throughout the city, just continues to mount. And that's my concern, is that if we had a situation where if the officer was going to go Code 3 on that discretion, if they were able to let communications know, and communications then went out over the air and says there's 6 units going Code 3, then the supervisor could actually control it. But we put in the order that the supervisor can control it, but all this is going on without their knowledge.
That could well be the case. The issue is, you mentioned the best information comes from the PR at scene on the line or the officer at scene. We got to get the officer to the scene first. And part of the problem we face, as you know, is a lack of units to be able to get people there quickly, to get responding units there quickly. With the digital radios now, it's changed the way we do policing. There's only one person can be on that radio at a time, so we try not to tie up on a help call or a significant call. Everybody's saying, I'm going from this location to that location to code 3. If we do that, that's all you'll have on the thing. You won't have...
That's not new. Even our older systems, only one person could talk.
Right. Well, in the analog systems in days past, you could hear on the cheater, you could hear other people in the background.
If you go back before you got those radios,
Right.
and historically, there's only been one person or you'd be bleeped out.
Right.
So we've dealt with that for decades.
Well, we've dealt with it to the degree that we've got what we've got, and that's what we're trying to fix. I don't think there's a perfect answer to where you're trying to get. The reality is nothing changes. You still have units right now going code 3. That convergence issue we talked about before, we're concerned about that as well. But what we're doing is we're providing protection for the officers, we're providing protection for the city per the vehicle code, for them responding code 3. You mentioned the city may still be liable while the officer may not be liable. At the end of the day, it's the city's got deep pockets. People are going to sue the city regardless. The officer then would be protected. The city would be protected in that you didn't have the exposure by the officer for violating the department policy, even though they're within the California Vehicle Code.
But I'm saying is that I think what you're creating a policy to help those who violate the rules. And I think the issue is if they're not willing to go over the air, which they can now. They can actually go in the air.
I understand that well.
Code 3.
Yeah.
And they choose not to. And so now we're saying you can go code 3 without ever asking anyone, telling anyone, and nobody knows.
No, we say now you should go over the air. We don't say you shall. Currently, it's you shall if you want to initiate code 3 response yourself.
Why wouldn't we want to know that? Why wouldn't we want supervisors to know
Where they're coming from and where they're going?
Well, the thing is that if I'm the 6th unit,
Right.
saying I'm going code 3 to a call,
Right.
and I go over the air, then the sergeant has the ability to say, don't do that.
They still have the ability to be able to
But
get
if I
on
don't
and
say
say, we've
anything-
got 3 units. No, we
But if I don't say anything and I just go,
that's correct. He wouldn't know you particularly are going, but if he knows he's already got 3 units going code 3, he can say, no additional units respond code 3, everyone else respond code 2. So he rather than not addressing what he doesn't know, he can address what he does know. I've got 3 units en route
this is what
code
he
3, that's
doesn't know,
sufficient.
what he doesn't know is the unintended consequences.
Well, I just addressed that. If he says I've got 3 units going code 3, that's sufficient, then any additional units beyond that were going code 3 would be doing so against the supervisor's direction.
Yeah, but again, I don't see how it harms the current system by asking the officer to go over the air and notify everyone in the area. And then if you have a situation to where something is going on in Southwest and Newton units are encroaching, shouldn't you know that? Or is that just all their discretion? And again, it's not necessarily how fast you get there, it's if you get there.
Right.
And I think that's what the real dilemma is that we're creating something in an effort to get people there quicker. If we follow what the fire department does and you watch how they do code 3s, they stop at every intersection.
Absolutely.
So we can't say that they're not responding to any less danger or any less serious calls.
Right.
But yet their response is completely different as it relates to speed and a variety of other things.
Well, I think part of that is, as was touched on earlier on by Mr. Zine, it was rare in the past for an LAPD unit to go code 3 anywhere. So when they got a code 3 call, the adrenaline raced, and they put the pedal to the metal, and they were running there fast. The paramedics you watch or the fire department, they stop at every intersection because everywhere they go code 3. So it's not a big deal. The adrenaline doesn't go up, the blood pressure doesn't go up, and that's what's going to happen, I believe, with the LAPD cars going code 3. It'll become a matter of course. It's the way they operate and the way they do business. So I think that a big part of it, the adrenaline, the push to get there fast, it'll be a push to get there safely as opposed to the current bodily reaction that they have to a code 3 response.
Yeah. Well, we'll just have to disagree. I think let me just ask you on the issue of the backup on Section F, where we specifically say that it is not an imminent danger, but yet we give examples, and then we say code 3. And I'm just wondering how that definition, as it relates to the wording of a non-emergency, now allows code 3.
You want that?
And then we say every other unit, additional unit can go also.
If I may, it is an emergency, and we've redefined it as an emergency. We believe that an active perimeter, a foot pursuit, a 415 group, those are emergency situations.
Then let me ask you, what is the difference between F and G then?
G is clearly something that's not an emergency. If you need an additional officer to consult with, where time is not paramount, that's a non-emergency situation.
You have the situation under control. You may have a vehicle stop with 4 occupants. You want an additional unit there before you get them out to talk to them, to prone them out, or to whatever.
But wouldn't the officer that asked for backup have the ability to say, send me a unit code 3?
They do.
I mean, so I'm just saying, if they are there assessing it, and they say, send me 1 unit backup code 3,
Right.
to add in there that other units have a discretion to come anyway.
Well, that's the supervision and management issue. If you have units actually doing that don't have a reasonable or a reason to do that is reasonable, then that's a training issue or a discipline issue, depending on the case.
No, but if you don't know it, that's the dilemma. If you don't go over the air, you never know it.
If they don't go over there and say they're responding, we ask them to go over there, but we change it from shall to should, so that we do know that they're going. But we put the should in there rather than the shall, so that we don't tie up a digital frequency with people responding and not being able to hear the guy requesting help.
These are the same people you say that are reluctant to use the radio and go code 2.5 in violation of the rules, and now you're saying you're going to say should rather than shall.
That's correct.
It just gives latitude to those who choose not to follow the rules in the first place.
No, actually, the rules are being changed so that they would be following the rules. It's a training or a discipline issue if they abuse those rules.
Well, let me just say, I think that every place you put in the order that just allows units to go code 3, you're just creating a situation that eventually you'll have another 6th wall or 5th wall where units converge on one intersection, can't hear each other, and you're going to have cars and ending up injuring each other for no purpose other than people a mile or 2 away from a location makes an assumption that they must get somewhere, and they're the least prepared to know what's there. We're ignoring what the officer that may be asking for the backup. We're ignoring the people who communications. And the key is if you choose to say communications is not part of the formula, then we're also ignoring 100 years of what role communications played. And so I'm concerned that eventually we'll have another 6th or 5th wall, and because this discretion without knowledge is very, very dangerous. And to let officers believe miles away you can make that determination is something that is going to be a great concern, and the unintended consequences is injuries primarily to officers. The other thing I was going to ask you, have we gotten any clarity on what these terms of regard to safety or arbitrary exercise, do we have examples of what that means by the vehicle code?
No, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah, 21055, it says it does not relieve the driver of a vehicle from the duty to drive with due regard for the safety of all persons using the highway, nor protect them from the consequences of an arbitrary exercise of privileges granted in that section. The section is fairly liberal in protecting the officers in the city when they respond code 3. It comes back to being reasonable.
Do
Right.
you have examples of what those terms mean as to what would put you outside of those parameters?
Yeah, I'd have to consult with the city attorney on cases or case law on that one. The penal code doesn't give examples, certainly.
Each situation is viewed under the reasonableness standard.
And then earlier mentioned on pursuits that we weren't changing the pursuit policy, but if we look at page, I think, 4, we've made a couple of revisions that, again, although the pursuit policy says that we have at least 2 units and a supervisor, we're now saying that if an officer asks for a backup, then any unit can respond code 3. So again, we're flooding the area to the same location with people going code 3, the communications and other units don't know anything about.
Yeah, and I think what we're tied down in is what the book says versus what life says. We have units responding code 3 to help calls right now. and they're doing so unauthorized. But is that what the expectation of an officer putting out a help call is, that officers are going to get there fast? Absolutely. And lights and siren, get them there when traffic doesn't allow them to get there otherwise. So what we're doing is making the policy coincide with what the realities that the officers face on the street are.
But again, the reality, again, is if we're saying that communications, a call to communication limits their ability, I think that's a safety valve that that we're eliminating unwarranted.
Let me just, if I could just jump in for a second, and then Mr. Zine, and then back to you, Mr. Parks, for one quick, which is, it's not just the expectation of the officers. I mean, it seems to me we're also talking about the expectation of public.
Absolutely,
They
primarily. Yeah.
call for help from the LAPD, and in their mind, it's serious. They expect that the police will respond lights and sirens if possible and get there as soon as they can, right?
Absolutely.
So that's one point. I mean, the new policy seems to comport with what the public wants out of a 911 call to the police department.
Yes, sir.
The second within law, and what the new policy seems to comport with what the public wants when it comes to a serious call for help to 911, without question. Second question I have is, or second point really, it's not a question, is on liability. If by doing this, by putting this change into effect, you bring more officers under the umbrella of the state law.
Right.
You bring more officers under the umbrella of acting in an authorized fashion consistent with city policy.
Yes.
If you adopt the city policy based on not a whim, but, you know, a long reasoned evaluation, and you train on it, I mean, that's precisely what we want government agencies to do to reduce liability, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Mr. Zine.
Thank you. Reality versus perception.
Right.
The reality is, and Mr. Parks and I come from a different world of law enforcement when we didn't have the technology we have today.
Right.
We didn't have women in deputy chief positions within the department. It's a changing environment. It's a changing department. And I compliment the department on promoting you to deputy chief. It just happened. I'm still reflecting on that. But I think what we need to look at is the traditional role of the department has been restrictive. It's been restricting officers' activities. It's been in a restricted mode. And what we find now is it's more of an open mode, a different philosophy. The discretion rests with the officers versus this is the rule, follow the rule, you violate the rule, you're going to get in trouble and you're going to get days off, etc. So I don't fault the change in philosophy. The concern I originally had when Councilman Parks brought it to my attention was officers, multiple units, motor officers, metro officers, fire, everybody get at a converged intersection and we have a major catastrophe. That was my concern.
Sure.
But it is a different world. It's a different environment. Clearly, crime is different than it was in past years. So I'm going to go along with what you're asking, and I think that it's important that the city attorney, which I just asked, they haven't been consulted on the liability issue, but I think we need to put as many umbrellas over the city taxpayers as possible with the liability. I'd only ask that we get a report back in 6 months to show where we are with this. Are we increasing collisions with officers, reducing? And the other question, or the other interest would be some public education campaign. And the fire department did a great campaign with the fire truck, pull to the right and stop. Maybe something with our traffic divisions, that when a unit is code 3, a fire unit or a rescue unit or whatever the case may be, cite some of these motorists who are not responding. They're driving through the intersections, paying absolutely no attention.
Right.
And I've done some trips in Europe when units were code 3 and people don't even pull over. They don't even stop. The units have to go weave around them because there's total disregard for units that in other countries go into emergency calls. So I would ask that somehow some additional enforcement take place for people who are violating that, and then we get a report back in 6 months showing where we are with this program. And I think that, again, it's the restrictive attitude of the department versus giving officers discretion. Traditionally, there wasn't a lot of discretion given, and I think it's a new philosophy. So I'm not going to fault it, but as has been stated, no one wants to see any officers hurt.
Right.
And my question was to protect the officers as well as the citizens. And if it doesn't work, then we're bold enough to say it didn't. And if it does work, then obviously we're getting there quicker and giving officer discretion. We give them a badge, we give them a gun, go out there and protect society, but we're going to be very restrictive on how you conduct yourself. And if they get out of line, then there's consequences for that. But I would support the special order number 13 for those reasons. But again, some education, some enforcement for the motorists that aren't yielding, and a report back in 6 months saying where we are with it.
Thank you.
And if I could add, just real quick for Chief from when you do the training component, if you would just stress it's in your best interest to verbalize your going code 3, because it protects them if they're in an accident, that there's a record of that. It'd be in our best advantage to, on the lines of what Mr. Parks was saying, not totally, but that they do that, and they'd be encouraged to do that.
Let me just jump in for a second. There was a recent crash in another city where a unit was code 3, got in a collision, 2 people died, and there's a big question, was the unit code 3 or not? Some people say yes, some people say no. So when the officers do acknowledge that to communications, if they can do that, if some witness says, yeah, the lights and siren, but there's a question in this particular city now, was the officer La Habra, and it's, 2 dead people, and obviously it's a critical factor.
Our units have the ability, motor transport can look at the black box in the car and tell you after the fact, was that unit operating code 3 at the time of the accident? So technology, again, has stepped up in that way. And jumping on what you said, Mr. Zine, I think we train officers, we train them as probably as good or better than anybody else in the world. We put them on the street to do the most complex job probably out there in the world, and we give them the ability to be able to take someone's freedom, or if they have to take someone's life, but we limit them in their ability to flip on the lights and siren when they try and get to a call. I think this is bringing it in line with the responsibility that we are giving them, and I think the latitude would be appropriate. So thank you for your support on that.
Mr. Parks, sorry, your turn.
Let me ask, Stu, you made a comment earlier about liability.
Yeah.
On those cases you identified, do you know the outcome of holding those officers accountable, or what was the outcome in those cases?
I know in the $6.25 million case, that was determined to be oh, wait a second. I really can't talk specifics about the cases if they may be identifiable, because that would be
Okay, could
the
you just
personnel records.
get that to us?
Yes.
Information, so we'll know what the accountability. That's my last question.
Just one more thing. Communications, I was in communications this morning in the Valley, their dispatchers week, and they got some concerns about their responsibility. If some training could be given to the folks there, because they saw the order and they had some reservations, concerns, if they could
I've been working with the communications people downtown in their training unit that's actually designing their training. So we've been communicating back and forth now several times.
Because once it goes into effect, that they're in the dark. They're in the dark right now. We need to make sure they're informed.
Because it was immediately 245 by the council, they didn't go ahead with the training to train their people.
Okay.
All right. Mr. Parks, do you want a roll call vote on your motion? What would
I'm just going to vote no. I think it's pretty clear where the other 3 are going.
Okay, so you want to vote, okay, so I wanted to ask if you wanted an actual vote on it. Okay. All right, so the motion before us is Mr. Parks's motion to his motion is a motion to disapprove the police department's new policy pursuant to Charter Section 245. We can, if you vote to receive and file, we're still going to report it to the council. So why don't we just have, just for clarity purposes.
That was the 3 of us. You and I were on that motion too. The 3 of us were on that.
I wasn't on the motion.
No, 3 of us. Myself, Mr. Parks, and Mr. Smith.
Okay, so you can vote no on your own motion, or you can vote no on Mr. Parks' motion, however you prefer to construe it.
That we all signed on that motion, but obviously we have a difference of opinion now.
You were, okay. You were against it before you were for it. It's okay. So why don't we then, just for purposes of clarity of the action we take today, why don't we have the vote on the 245 motion as it was submitted? Mr. Parks will vote yes on that 245 motion. I will vote no on it.
We're voting no.
No.
Okay, so it's 3 noes, 1 yes on the 245 motion. The motion will be reported to the council so the council can act on it.
And I would just like to make sure on our committee report, because I won't be here when it comes to council, that unless amended to provide more, a mandate that communications is more involved in these types of Code 3 runs, in my judgment, this is more liability to the city than what we're trying to solve. So it has, in my judgment, we have to amend it to reflect that communications is notified and accepts that communication as a unit going code 3, and that they not do it at their discretion and unknown to communications or supervisors.
They can also do that on the MDT, as I understand.
Right.
It can be verbal or through MDT.
But Mr.
They're
Parks,
saying they should.
but Mr. Parks is allowed to, in terms of having a minority report for his view, have those views included in the minority report. So what he just stated will be included in...
The majority report is to approve the new
No,
policy?
no, all right. Yeah, majority report is to approve the new policy.
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
for the reasons that Chief McDonald stated.
And 60 report back request. Sorry.
Yeah, namely that the new policy, increases public safety, reduces liability, and comports with the actual experience of the officers, and that there's additional training that the department is providing.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you, everybody. All right, item 5 is left. Call item 5 by saying item 5.
Item 5.
All right, cool. Who is presenting on item 5? We also have Gail Pincus here to offer public comment on it after they present.
What we've submitted from the CLA is a supplemental report to a prior CAO report. The CAO report had recommended that the grant not be accepted. The reason is because the impact to the general fund, frankly, would be greater than the grant itself. We subsequently worked with the CAO and the department to develop a revised grant budget, which would essentially result in no additional general fund impact. The manner in which that would be achieved would be to reallocate 2 vacant police officer 2 positions, and the incremental difference in upgrading the positions to a D2 and D3 would be paid by the grant. And the remaining cost of the police officer position is already borne by the general fund, so there would be no additional general fund impact.
Okay.
Jason Clean, Office of the CAO. Although there wouldn't be an additional general fund allocation for the police department this fiscal year, there would be a $514,000 general fund impact, because the department would have to reallocate resources to be spent on other programs and services to this program. So there would be a service or a program cut somewhere.
Ms. Gibson?
I'm not sure whether or not I necessarily agree with that interpretation. What we have outlined in terms of the in-kind contribution, if confirmed with the police department, is that the 2 detective 1s that would be allocated to the program and would be used as an in-kind contribution are in fact currently conducting investigations of domestic abuse cases, so their assignments would not be any different than what they are currently performing. So what we wanted to show to the council was essentially full disclosure. I think that the total cost seems to be very, very high, seems to give the implication that this is going to be an additional general fund impact. It is not an additional general fund impact. It is already in the budget. My understanding is that those positions are going to be continued, obviously, in the next fiscal year. We think that the value of the program that would be provided to the community certainly is worth accepting the grant.
Of the $150,000 provided by the grant, only $99,000 can actually be attributed to sworn salaries. So the ratio of general funded to grant funded salary dollars is 5-to-1, which isn't in the city's benefit. Over the 3 years, the grant will fund approximately $297,000 towards sworn salaries, which is $200,000 less than what the general fund is going to have to pay in year 1 alone. Taking into account the $1.5 million the general fund will actually expend on sworn salaries for this program over the first 3 years, in addition to the ongoing general fund commitments, after grant funding is no longer available, my office still recommends declining.
It's better when you both agree. Ms. Pincus?
As the originator of the DART program in Van Nuys in 1994, I began that program with absolutely no funding whatsoever. This is a possibility to expand what we're already doing, giving us another part-time advocate to add to the domestic abuse response team out of Van Nuys. It's also a way to possibly expand the richness of the program to other divisions in the San Fernando Valley because of the medical part of this. So it could be a way of making this more sophisticated. And one of the ways that the team gets tied up is at the hospital. I mean, we can be there for 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, waiting 2 or 3 hours just to be seen. And since this is going to be a specially dedicated facility, especially for the marital rapes, we could be in and out of there and going to 2 or 3 more calls where currently we're stuck. We're out of commission for that night. So it looks like it's a way to expand and become much more sophisticated with what we're already doing. And then hopefully what we're going to be able to do is expand this resource to other divisions in the San Fernando Valley to sort of make this new configuration of smaller divisions, providing higher levels of services and more expertise with a little bit of personnel that we already have. And the DART officer is already donated by LAPD. He's already there. It's already done. That would also be sort of a matching kind of fun kind of thing. That's a commitment that LAPD has already made. So we're excited. It just looks like something we're going to be able to do a better job. And I know in Van Nuys we've really sort of got even command staff that have had DART experience as a sergeant and as a lieutenant. So in some ways we've sort of got the division set up.
Okay, thank you. Alex, questions?
Nope.
Yeah. My concern, when's the deadline date for submission on this grant? When do we have to have it in by?
The grant has already been awarded. The grant was intended to begin in January of this year.
My problem is, as we're going into the budget session to determine what LAPD is going to look like, that's not been determined. We hear what the mayor wants to do. The budget committee hasn't decided what this council, or the recommendation of council is going to be. Council's not decided whether LAPD will be continue to grow, stop where they're at, or see some of the losses of personnel that every other department's going to see. And I've had a growing concern for some time as a member of the Budget Committee looking at grants that cost us more to accept than we get back in the way of support. And as worthy as this is, and it's been, I support everything you've done for many, many years, I'm at a point in time where I'm not going to be very likely to support any grant acceptances unless they're really funding 75% of a program. This is not one of those. And as good as the program it may be, I see a cost to the budget, and that is that it's taking people out of other positions, other roles, and putting them into this role where they were in the line item for other jobs. They may be vacant at the moment, but they're still in the TO for the department. And so there is a cost to the budget, and it's about 2/3 of this program. And that's one, at this moment in time, more than ever before, I'm having a problem with. I've always had a problem with the grant program because I think we just take too many projects on, and then we get down the road and we've got hundreds of people doing stuff that are only partially funded, and eventually the grants get reduced, and that's been a historic problem. The grants get reduced, and we continue to do it. See a lot of that in the city attorney's department. You may have to deal with that, you may not, but there's a lot of problems over in the city attorney department. We get grants that eventually we get reduced, and we say, why do we even do this anymore? And so I have really big concerns about this at this moment, and I want to hear Mr. Parks' issues too, hear some more discussion on this. But I mean, originally the CAO said don't do this because it's not worth it. And then you say, well, we can take these positions and make it worth it. We're still paying for those positions. Either way, the numbers are the same. So you can't say, well, we're not creating new positions. The people are there. We're just reallocating their usage. The costs remain the same as the city budget. And that's something that this year is more problematic than ever in our history. And so I'm inclined to vote no today, along with all other grant acceptances from here on, unless they're 75% or greater funded. I just don't want to do this anymore.
My concern, I think the CAO is right on in the fact that even though we say there's no additional impact to the general fund, and as we know with these grants, they never are a one-year grant. We will go 2 years and 3 years. So it would be up to $1.5 million to recover $400,000. And that is not an equation I think we can afford. Plus, I think when we allow these grants to drive our budget process, we're actually budgeting outside the process. We gave those positions, those D1s, for specific purposes. We hired P2s for specific purposes. Now we're rearranging the order of the organization in order to create basically permanent D3s and D2s. This is a program, if it's worthy, should be part of the budget process and should go through and get evaluated with everything else that the police department wants to do. But we shouldn't drive additional city expense because of a $150,000 grant that we're now going to drive $1.5 million of city revenue. So I'm not going to support it. I think we also have asked in our budget policies that we not accept grants that we cannot continue on and that we cannot continue to fund, and that the city gets funding is greater than what the grant is, and that's part of the financial policy. So I think that not only when we have these budget crises, this is not good budgetary policy, even if times are good, that we're expending triple or quadruple amount of money for the grant.
Well, you know what? Because of the CLA-CAO schism, is there a chance we could continue the matter for a meeting or two and give you all the opportunity to discuss it further rather than sending it over the cliff today? And see what you can come up with. I think you've heard the concerns. If it came to a vote, I would vote differently, but I think the concerns are well put and well expressed, and I'm hoping that there's a chance that you guys can see eye to eye.
You can come back with a $150,000 program. You can
Okay,
come back
so-
with a $150,000 program.
So let's continue the item. Ms. Fenga will discuss with you when to rehear it, because I want to keep it going, Ms. Fenga. What?
One more speaker's card for you, general public comment.
Oh, we have a general public comment card. Jeff Dearborn, I don't think, maybe you didn't, De La Rosa?
Yes,
Sorry.
sorry, Mr. Weiss. Jeff De La Rosa. I need your help. A couple weeks ago, a woman named Mary O'Connor addressed the entire council. She's a disabled woman. She's also pregnant. Her animals were seized during an eviction. The department went to charge her $7,000 to redeem them in boarding fees. On the day that she came to redeem them, they told her that one of them, a $1,600 teacup Yorkshire Terrier, had been stolen. Now, previous to that, the animals were impounded on December 18th. On December 20th, Ed Boakes, the Department of Animal Services, auctioned off 10 seized LAX puppy mill dogs, 5 of which were identical to Mary O'Connor's. On the 20th, 2 days after Mary O'Connor, dog was seized. So what I'm having a problem with the department is transparency, cooperation, any kind of investigation regarding what happened to this woman's dog. Now, which brings me to item 2. The Board of Commissioners for Animal Services is basically ineffective. Reason being, Mr. Boakes, who you have all addressed at great length in the last month. The board is unable to set its own agenda. It submits items for consideration on the agenda, and they're blocked by Ms. Barth and Mr. Boakes. This happens over and over and over again. Last point, they won't meet. Last year, they met 11 times. Charter, Administrative Code, mandates that they meet 24 times. Now, the only reason they're meeting tomorrow is because I demanded it and told them that if they did not meet twice in April, that I would get an injunction forcing them to meet. So please, address this.
Thank you for your
Thank you.
Just for the record, there was a motion introduced by Mr. Cardenas, I believe, and you?
I think it was
Alcon, with a vote of no confidence on Mr. Boakes. And we'll...
Signed by 4 council.
Yeah, signed by a lot. So
Oh,
there
there.
is going to be discussion about Mr. Boakes, and we certainly will bring this issue up.
Just, it goes deeper than Mr. Boakes? Thank you.
Meeting adjourned? Why not?